Salt stung Tyrion's lips as he stood on the black cliffs of Dragonstone and watched the moon fling its pale path across the gullet. The sea breathed like some old god asleep beneath the basalt. Out and in, dark against darker, smelling of tar and kelp and iron, he leaned on his cane and listened to it. There was solace in the regularity. The sea would take what it wanted, slowly if it must, suddenly if it could. So would rulers if left to themselves. So would fire. Behind him the castle groaned, a beast of volcanic bones and dragon-carved throat vents that whispered when the wind moved right. He thought of another night years past. Another shore, another fleet, another plan outlined with a stub of charcoal over a table sticky with wine. The green fire had made a blossom of the Blackwater and preserved his sister's crown for a time. Now a different crown waited across that same water. History did not repeat so much as it struck the same bell with a heavier hand. Boots scuffed the pebble path. Davos Seaworth joined him, cloak pulled tight, hair streaked gray by salt and years. A lantern swung from his hand, hooded to a slit of light. "You stand too close," Davos said without looking. "The rocks like men who do that. They keep them." "The rocks have had better men than me," Tyrion said. "Let them grow choosy." The hooded lantern's slit bobbed. "Well, I like you enough to pull you back, and my back complains more than it did." "Your message," said Haste. "It's late for whispers. Ship's boys water the rum by now, and even Eurons get tired of killing the moon." Tyrion nodded toward the open water, where flecks of faint glow marked distant mastheads. "He sits there in the dark, with scorpions like hedgehogs sprouting across his decks. The city trusts him to keep the mouth closed. We must open it." He tapped the cane twice. "Not with a dragon. Not first." Davos turned, the lantern's slit climbing to Tyrion's face. "Then with what?" "With old tricks that still work when pride forgets them," Tyrion said. "With the memory of a river that burned. And with the wind." A footfall as soft as a cat's, and Yara Greyjoy's voice came from the gloom. "And with ironborn that aren't his." She stepped into the lamp's glow, sea leather creaking, hair braided tight. A silver hoop at her ear winked. "You sent for me, Hand?" "There are few tasks so fitting as a reaving of reavers," Tyrion said. "Your longships are scarred but fast. Your men know the night. And you know your uncle." "I know that he sleeps as little as he boasts," Yara said, mouth curving oddly. "He likes his own wakefulness, like a snake tasting the air. There's no slipping past him if he has mind to look." "Then we won't slip," Tyrion said. "We'll stumble, loudly. We'll give him something to smile at until it bites." Davos grunted. "Fire ships." "Not wildfire," Tyrion said. "We have neither the guild nor the patience to toy with forces that love escaping their masters. But pitch is loyal. Tar is loyal. Oil mixed with quicklime will cling like jealousy. We have barrels enough to make a priest weep. We'll pack them into hulks so old their ribs remember summer under Aegon. We'll float them down with the tide like a prayer answered late. And when the Iron Fleet cuts its anchor cables to flee the blaze, you'll be waiting with the night behind your sails." Yara's eyes gleamed. "And who lights your prayers, Lannister? Your hands are clever when they count coins, I hear." "Some of us still remember how to get burned," Davos said, with a humor that did not reach his eyes. "I've done worse in Stannis' time. The trick is wind and tide. We need fog if the gods will be kind." "The gods are rarely kind," Tyrion said, "but there's a finer needle to thread. When chaos blooms, we'll ask a certain queen to fly." He did not turn when Daenerys spoke. He felt the change in the air the way a hound feels thunder long before it comes. She moved like a whisper of silk, and heat followed her as if it were eager to please. Her silver hair, braided with dull bronze rings, caught stray light like fish scales. "You would chain my will to your barrels," she said, not angrily, thoughtfully. "You would draw their eyes and point my teeth. If a dragon is a hammer, the world looks like nails," Tyrion said. "But even a smith keeps tongs and awls. If Drogon and Regal sweep together when the scorpions are looking the wrong way, they won't look the wrong way long," Daenerys said. "No," Tyrion agreed, "but long enough." They are men. They may be monsters under a king's banner. They may be greyjoys with sharks for fathers. But their attention is still made of flesh. The fire ships will take that. He looked out at the water. Let them answer the wrong question for a heartbeat. The next heartbeat is yours. She watched the black horizon. Wind tugged at her cloak and licked hair across her cheek. And if we do this, if the sea belongs to us after, what then? Then we do the hard part, Tyrion said softly. We endure. We starve a city without breaking it. We build, in the minds of the people we will rule, a story that is not written by fire. There are granaries in King's Landing. The queen will keep them for her soldiers and her sellswords and her pride. The rest must learn hunger. Hunger is a persuader. It is not merciful, but it is less merciless than the other thing. Cersei will wait for me to grow impatient, Daenerys said. She believes I will burn her to prove my right. She has made a mask of me for the city to fear. And if you refuse the mask, Tyrion said, almost pleading and not hiding it, the city will tire of being the face that wears it. She did not answer at once. The sea spoke again, a long sigh, and a gull barked uselessly at a star. Finally Daenerys said, You want me to be patient. I want you to win, Tyrion said. Very well, she said. Win me a sea. The plan rode the next day on gull's wings and carried knives in its feathers. Vari laid the routes, his little birds chirping where watchfires sat and when captains took their ease. Davos and his smugglers nose charted tide and reef. Yara parceled out men to ships with hulls that would not betray them and wrapped the bravest in rags that smelled of fish and honest fear. Tyrion walked among stacks of barrels and paid to have every bung sealed twice. It was not grand. It was work. Pitch stank in the yard until men dreamed of it. The black stuff smeared faces and hair, made devils of them all. A baker's boy who had lied about his age to pull a rope singer-thin stamped his feet in his father's boots and sang the same verse over and over until Davos clapped him kindly on the head. You'll see your song, the Onion Knight said. And remember to be quiet then. At dusk they warped the first hulk off the Dragonstone quay, a sagging cog whose planks knew wormboard creak and the whisper of death through seams. Yara stood on its deck like a queen of wrecks, and when the oarman shoved them clear she squinted at the fog blooming from the east as if she had ordered it. In truth it rose from the water's own breath and the warmth of a day fading. By midnight it lay like thin wool over the gullet. The Iron Fleet had cast its net wide. Euron Greyjoy's silence and 3 scorpion-heavy longships rode nearer the bay's mouth, and lighter galleys lurked further north toward the river's channel. Lanterns hung hooded, barely light. The enemy was not idle. They were close-mouthed and lean with it. A scorpion creaked like a cricket and the sound crawled over the water. Men murmured to one another, fog beating their beards. Euron lay in a hammock slung under a rib, boots on, a knife stuck in the timber within easy reach. He was listening to his ship the way a man listens to a woman he hates. He had not drunk since dusk. His crew knew better than to touch a skin when fog sat like an old man's breath. His smile came and went, a knife sliding in and out of its sheath. When the bell forward struck 2 slow notes, he let himself drop and landed silent in the fog damp. Report, he said. Fishing cogs down channel earlier, his mate said. We turned one. Salt fish and old bread. They swore they were bound for Gulltown. Starving folk lie better than fat ones, Euron said and stroked his beard. Keep the lantern low. His eyes moved over the crew like cold fingers. The dragon is a woman with 2 hands. The one we can see is the one we must fear less. The other is the clever one. So we watch for it. Not long after he said those words, a scuff of oars reached him from the fog. The sound was soft, guarded. Could be a sloop's tender or a boy's skiff. Then the scent came, and Euron laughed. Quiet, with no joy. Pitch, he said. They bring Blackwater's dirty children to visit their mother. Orders snapped like bone. Lines were thrown and hauled. Scorpions elevated with a squeal that eels might have envied. The crew, well-whipped dogs that they were, moved as one. Men on the rail fired, and arcing bolts took a shadow in the fog and cut it audibly. There was a hiss as something spilled. The smell of tar grew rich and heady. The first of the fire ships thumped into Silence's starboard side as if it had wandered there by mistake, its hull kissing with a lover's ignorance. Silence's men were ready with pikes to push it off, and they did. The fire did not oblige. Skittered like a rat. It played over the tar-slick rail, then snuffed where seawater had wet the timbers. Once, then twice. Euron bared his teeth. "Not green enough," he said. "Mockery. Send it back to them." His mate shouted, and a grapnel clawed. Men heaved, and the hulk scraped along the Silence like two blind beasts seeking a path around each other. "Another there," came a cry. The fog had gone merciful. It thinned and showed a blacker bulk looming, silent as a prayer, then another beyond, then three. A sailor screamed because something burned his hand. He'd grabbed a rope that had been soaked in oil. Men can be taught not to be fools, but never not to be men. On the seaward flank, Yara raised her hand and let it fall. Her longships, which were fewer and lighter than her uncle's, but run by a different music, came silent with sails brailed, oars a whisper. Their bows nuzzled the fog and slid out of it like knives leaving skin. The first fire ship, its deck slick with oil and strewn with straw, took a spark from a slow match dropped as planned into a nest near the prow. It caught with an almost innocent humph, and flame raced, bright as new coin. The wind took it with a suddenness that made two men curse the mother. Davos watched from a knuckled rock half a mile off, wrapped in a cloak that stank worse than pitch. Beside him, a boy whose name he kept forgetting fidgeted and breathed too hard. Davos laid a hand on his thin shoulder without looking from the water. The fire ships blazed now, floating altar fires. The night took color. The scorpions, those hulking scabs nailed to decks and quays, began to traverse toward the moving stars, and the night of the Iron Fleet became a night of men shouting to one another in a language that all sailors know. "Now," Davos said. Tyrion stood with him. He had not moved, though the rising fire had made his face a theater mask. He nodded. "Now," he repeated. The boy sent a runner down to the narrow beach where messengers waited with sticks, twin wands that smoldered like fox tails. They were raised and lowered 3 times, and on the higher hill behind them, a bigger fire answered by going out. Dragons do not belong on wheels or lines or pages. They look wrong when hemmed. They are best understood in the gaps they leave in men. But 2 shapes blacker than smoke, more certain than wind, unstitched the fog when the hill fire died. They came in from the open water where nobody had thought to look because the men with scorpions had been taught by fear to watch the gates and not the sky. Wings beat. Air bowed. The sound was old. Drogon dove-like spite. Regal arrowed beside him. The first scorpion that turned toward them was too slow. The bolt it spat soared into dark and vanished. Fire answered. It took the scorpion as if it were kindling that had been waiting its whole life to be loved. Men under it became black shapes and then no shapes. A second scorpion spoke and its bolt hummed, passing a dragon by so narrow a margin that Tyrion's heart stopped and then shook in his ribs like a rat in a dog's mouth. But the dragons were not a hammer now. They were needles. They stitched fire into the right places. The scorpions, the rope lockers, the barrels that waited like lies in the hold. Chaos is a living thing that breeds on itself. The fire ships had done their work even when they missed the work of making men look. Yara's longships used the looking. They slid into gaps, grappled, backed water hard to let the current twist their victims side on, then drove iron into belly planks. A longship is a thief at sacking, made for quick hands, not for duels of artillery. Euron's heavier toys could not swing fast enough or low enough to fend them. When a side caught, they set it alight as if writing a letter and drew off. Euron never panicked. That was his gift and his flaw. He saw the blade through to the hilt in every wound he took. He slashed the grappling rope himself when one red-bearded raider tried to hold silence to a burning hull. He kicked the raider's head when he came over the rail and split it like an unripe fruit. He roared orders that men obeyed because their fear of him had a longer tail than the fear of the dragons. But even the hardest man must choose which terror to serve when both are at hand. Men whose job it had been to stand before scorpions and crank them fast moved without knowing they had moved, ducking and scrambling where there was no cover, because fire was too close to be a name and had become a touch. A bolt from somewhere, perhaps one of the city's own scorpions mounted on the quay, hummed up and struck Regal's left wing. The dragon faltered and banked raggedly, bleeding light. Tyrion did not breathe again until he watched Regal settle into a lower, circling glide, smoke trailing. He wanted to shout at the sky like a father at a reckless child, but he said nothing. Daenerys, astride Drogon, was a shadow cut out of flame. She rode lower than he had ever seen. When a scorpion crew tried to reload after the bowstring failed and slapped a man open, Drogon took the whole machine, men and all, with a roar that left the world clean behind it. It did not last long. The sea rarely does its important work loudly for very long. Silence staggered clear of two flaming hulks and found the current fresh and eager under her. Euron's mate pointed and shouted to cut the last cable. Euron licked blood from his thumb and smiled because he saw the shape of survival and liked it. He did not see Yara until her prow kissed his hull and the shock bounced him against his rail. Her men were already throwing hooks. She was not coming to lay her board. She was coming to pin him as a butcher pins a lamb. He looked up into her face as she came across on a rope and swung like a pendulum with a knife in his hand to meet her. For a heartbeat he grinned like a boy at a fair. The knife and the grin hit her wrong. It was the grin that decided it. Their blades clattered. His broad, hers thinner, both iron that had known worse mouths than sea. He was stronger. He made it matter as men always try to. Yara made his strength take the wrong purchase, stepping past, letting his cut open air, turning her hip into him so he would swing himself into the rail. He was quick and filthy and very good. He bent backward like a cat and caught his heel on the bulwark and made his body into a line that brought him back upright with a snap. His knife kissed her arm and made it leak. She ignored the pain the way a good sailor ignores a wave. "All I ever wanted," he panted, "was to drown the world. Then start," she said, and fainted near his eye with the knife she had not shown yet. He flinched. The flinch was tiny. It saved men less dangerous than him every day, but it opened his chest for one slow heartbeat. Her main blade, held low to disguise its path, climbed from his ribs to his throat. He made a sound that should have been a laugh and gurgled instead. She shoved him with her forearm and he pinwheeled over the rail and hit the water like a sack of anchors. Silence shuddered, as if she understood what had been taken from her. By dawn the Iron Fleet was broken. What had not burned drifted. What had not drifted went down by the slowest road the sea offers. Men clung to planks and called to mothers the way men always do. The eastern sky became a shame-colored ribbon. The fog thinned until the black shoulders of Dragonstone showed and the blacker teeth of King's Landing's walls beyond, with their ugly new scorpion horns pricking the air, useless now. A gull took a man's eye for an egg. Another man slapped at it and cried, and that was war as much as any charge on any field King's historians prefer to remember. Regal returned to Dragonstone limping on the wind, his wing torn and smoking. He landed like a tired mountain and lay, steaming, while men who would not have dared touch a dragon yesterday ran forward with water and raw meat and hands that trembled. Daenerys slid from Drogon and went to Regal first, her face uncovered and as naked as any mother's. She set her palm on the membrane of his wounded wing and closed her eyes. Drogon watched her with a cat's interest that would become a lion's should anyone mistake the moment for weakness. Tyrion watched the three of them, the true rulers of that piece of earth, and found breath halting again in his throat. "Thank you," Daenerys said quietly when she straightened and turned to him. Her hair smelled like smoke. "He will fly again." They did not take him fro. "And me." "They took enough," Tyrion said. "We must take more." He let the salt wind dry the sweat at his temples and then spoke louder so Yara and Davos would hear. "We hold the gullet. Yara, chain it with your ships at 3 deep. Not close enough for one flaming ship to leap to another, close enough for arrows to argue before they hit water. Davos, set out pickets upriver. No grain barges. Not a jar of oil. We give the city the skin of the mouth and share the flesh among ourselves. Varys will send word to our friends on land. We will tighten hands on roads. We will let the city learn a new language. It's called silence. He slept that night because he had to, and when he dreamed of barrels like small coffins that carried fire instead of men. In the morning, ravens ran their ink. In the afternoon, tents blew up along the humped backs of hills west of the city, outside bowshot but close enough that the banners were not rumors. The masts of her dragons, the silver of the wolf, the gray of the unsullied's discipline. The city's bells kept their tongues. The walls bristled. The scorpions looked down their noses at the bare fields as if soil might grow dragons. The first days felt like a held breath. King's Landing, a beast with iron fins and a stone mouth, lay in its sunlight and watched them. The harbor, which had been the city's throat, closed. Its few remaining ships were drawn up and lashed along the quays. The Ironborn under Yara laughed when a would-be smuggler pulled a basket boat out from Flea Bottom looking to sell turnips to a soldier, and found himself staring into the eyes of a raider who had turned smuggling into religion long before. Turnips fell into the green for fish to ignore and men to mourn. The second week, the people began to ask out loud where the grain barges were. Bread was sold with line ropes and an army of flies. Street cant found new words for hunger. The gold cloaks, sweaty in the heat, cracked two skulls in a row over a stale loaf that had been stolen from a child and congratulated themselves before going off to drink a kind of beer that had learned to taste sour overnight. The bakeries took to opening only when the carts arrived under guard spears. Their ovens cooled more than they warmed. Cersei watched from her balcony with a goblet in hand that Qyburn refilled before she realized it needed refilling. She could see the enemy's tents, and beyond them the broken, black-toothed circle of the ruin where the September had been. Sometimes, if the wind tacked kindly, she could hear their horses and their lowing cattle and the faint, inhuman calls of unsullied training. It offended her as filth offends a clean floor. She told herself she felt nothing more than a true queen's contempt. Then she watched longer than she knew. "They will grow impatient," Qyburn said, hands lost somewhere in the recesses of his sleeves. "She is fire. It is in such that the wind lives. She is a girl who became a story and thinks that makes her a woman," Cersei said and sipped. Her gaze flicked north where the Rose Road ran like a thin scar. "What are the granary counts?" "Healthy," Qyburn said. If we continue to ration as we have, there will be unrest." "There is always unrest," Cersei snapped. "I learned to drink to it when I was 15 and married to a man who preferred whores and boar tusks to me. Let the shops mutter. The ones who matter will be fed." Qyburn bowed. "The Golden Company is content," he said, "or satisfied with its contract, which is the same. Their commander took the wine I sent him with proper thanks and a question about when they would be asked to sally." "When I say," Cersei murmured, "when the wolves and eunuchs yawn, when it grows delicious." She smiled a small, white smile and stroked the rail with a fingernail. "Send more of that wine. Remind them they needn't love me to fight for me, only prefer my coin to my enemies. You think so little of people, Qyburn. That is your one flaw. They are ruled by preference far more than by fear. In that they are like me." He did not argue. "And scorpion bolts?" he asked. "Ready," she said. "Useless against patience, perhaps, but useful against pride, should it show its head." She turned again to the siege, to tents that did not move the way armies moved when they meant to fight. Something in her chest recognized something and did not name it. In the camp east of the city, inside the largest tent where the air smelled of hide and sweat and ink, a small council argued without raising voices because it had learned that lessons kept blood warmer than shouting did. Tyrion stood with a map and with a cup of small beer and with eyes that never stopped moving. Varys came and went like a sigh. Grey Worm stood without moving until he moved, each motion measured to be worth the cost. Jon Snow said little and looked tired. He carried the north about him the way other men carried a cloak, as weather. "We could strike the gate of the gods and be through within a day," Grey Worm said. "Unsullied are not stones. They are a blade. If you make a blade sleep, it rusts. A rusted blade cuts less, but it still cuts," Tyrion said. He touched the map where the river kissed the city and made a bruise-shaped harbor. "Their flour is sitting in bins. Their fish are not jumping into baskets any longer. If we wish to be cruel without seeming to be, we ensure their wells run but their mills do not. Davos is sending raiders nightly to break paddle wheels upstream. We keep the river traffic cowering beneath the city's archers. In a month they will curse your queen for not killing them and beg her to do it. In 2 they will hand her the keys and call it mercy. Jon shifted. And in 3? He asked. In 3, Tyrion said. The dead within will outnumber the soldiers by more than our swords could ever count. The city will tear itself apart. I pray. And he did not pretend he meant it piously. It begs earlier, Dean. Ares watched him with something like unfamiliarity. You used to be eager to show me cleverness dressed as mercy, she said. Now you show me mercy dressed as cruelty. He took that. My queen, he said. I have been wrong. That is a luxury I had when the world had not yet ended. It has ended twice since I met you. Once in ice and once in fire. Now I'm trying simply not to devour what I claim to save. The crumbs will stick in my beard. I am not proud. I am particular. Missandei, who had passed through war and collar and yet could make a tent corner feel like a school, said, The people in the city are poor. They suffer first and worst. There must be a way to let the suffering strike more true. Letters, Varys whispered. It was not a suggestion so much as a reminder that words existed. We can pierce them with words. My birds carry more than song. I still have a few within those walls. I can tell a man in a bakery when to keep back a sack and where to bring it. I can tell a mother with 2 children to look toward the river for a boat at midnight with a dark sail. I can tell a captain of the Golden Company that his family in Tyrosh misses him and that war rarely keeps the men it pays. Tyrion looked at him. You tell him the Iron Bank's patience has moved, he said. I have written to Tycho Nestoris. He tapped a folded parchment at his belt. Cersei paid them last year, true, but banks love nothing so much as a steady customer with a longer ladder and fewer scruples. The dragon offers both. Money is cowardly. It loves to run to the winning side before anyone else thinks to. And what will you pay them with? Jon asked. My life, if I must, Tyrion said, mouth twitching. Failing that, promises they find attractive and terms they can enforce. Titles, ports, customs tariffs. Davos will write a kindness into the numbers that makes the sums look like songs. Banks like music when it's written in their hand. Davos, who did not, as a rule, enjoy sums, still smiled with his mouth corners. I can count to whatever you ask, M-Lord, he said, so long as the sums sit on wood and float. The starving began invisibly and then made itself seen. A woman named Lael who had taken tickets at a cockfight and then washed the blood from the bench after took to boiling bones longer. She walked farther with her bucket and came back lighter. A boy who should have been learning how to cut kindling watched his younger brother watch him and learned instead how to lie about eating less. A gold cloak, younger than his mustache liked to admit, took 2 onions from an old man and gave him a backhand and later cried in a latrine because his mother would have recognized the way he had stood. Bread lines lengthened. Fistfights turned into knife fights. A pickpocket discovered religion when he watched a priest of the mother break a loaf and share it crumb by crumb and eat none himself. In Flea Bottom, the coins people prized most were buttons that fastened clothes that would otherwise blow open. Rats grew fat until they did not. Cersei did not venture into those streets. Her experience of hunger had always been other men's. She sat in council and told herself stories in which she was right even before voices recited them to her. They will not break us, she said. At this moment she thinks herself merciful and cunning both. She wants to be both because she has never had to choose. We will make her choose. How, your grace? Qyburn asked. He lifted a sheet that covered a thing on the table and set it aside. Beneath lay a small painted model of the city. At the points where the scorpions graced the walls, tiny iron pins had been hammered. At certain intersections in the streets, little clay jars. Saturday we have other cunning, he said, with a small smile that bared dry teeth. Green and under the city, waking sleep. She looked at the jars and away. They made something move in her. A thing that remembered smoke and bell ringing that had stopped too quickly. You mean to burn my city to starve hers? She asked. I mean to remind them, Qyburn murmured. Fire is a teacher. Sometimes it teaches stay away. Sometimes it teaches come closer. If a street goes bright somewhere poor, the rich will hear and be warmed. They will decide how long they want light. Cersei walked her fingers across the table and stopped at the model red keep. No, she said. Not yet. Not even for a clever lesson. We will try something simpler first. The Golden Company will sally east at dusk, with 50 horse and 200 foot. They will test the enemy's lines. They will retreat like a breath. If they are pursued, the scorpions will reach and pull. Dragons will think at last that they are being challenged, and a dragon that thinks is a dragon that goes where pride points. They will not pursue, Qyburn said soberly. Unsullied do not fly to bait, and the northern men have learned something from dying recently. Very well, she said. Then we kill 50 men and call it a message to the city that we remember it. She had the message carved into the bellies of the dead men by the kindly workmen Qyburn kept. The bodies were paraded along a wall. The message was simple. This is what mercy looks like from a distance. The city had perhaps 1,000 ways to tell itself stories. It chose one that said the queen was strong and that strength might taste like an apple in winter if you chewed it long and did not look at the bruise. The smell overwhelmed the story 2 days later. Tyrion stood with Jon and Grey Worm and watched the Golden Company's sally. It was neat. It was a businessman's swordplay, precise and designed to show that it had been forged and paid for. Grey Worm did not give it what it wanted. He withdrew a screen of spearmen 3 steps and no more, then sent 6 men forward not to pursue but to plant 2 stakes that waited in the ground like the answer to a question that had not yet been asked. When the golden calm, Paney tested again at the same place out of habit disguised as bravery. They found their horses' knees unmade by a wire that had considered them with exquisite care. They are not fools, Tyrion said. They will be expensive to bribe. He watched one of the mercenaries fall and another take his place without looking at him, in the way of good soldiers who know that grief is a luxury like perfume. But they are men who work for coin, and coin can be moved. Jon said nothing. Tyrion knew he was thinking of the baker's boy whose family he had watched arrive at the camp gate yesterday. Thin as rods, holding on to each other the way sailors hold to a line. Jon had given the boy half his ration of stew and walked away so that the boy would not have to thank him. Sometimes gratitude crushes. Varys came that night soft-footed. He had a sound when he moved that made Tyrion think of paper being put back on its proper shelf. Tycho Nestoris is amenable, he whispered. He was pleased to receive your parchment. He suggested mild interest in the new tariff structure you proposed in Lannisport and Oldtown. I told him we would be willing to be very mildly interested in increasing it in Bravos' favor. He smiled in the way Bravosi do when you have named the hook that already has their fish. And the Golden Company? Tyrion asked. Strickland. A cautious man, Varys said. Caution in sellswords looks like honor until it does not. He has a letter in his tent tonight. It speaks of payment schedules and of how ledgers can be balanced even when wars are not. It also speaks, in a hand that could be mine and could be 100 others, of his sister's health in Tyrosh. She is not unwell. But men die of worry daily in our trade. Tyrion rubbed his eyes. Do not be too clever, he said. If we drive him to a corner, he will decide that a corner is a throne. We want him to decide that this city is not worth the song he will have to sing about it. They ate small meals and made small moves, and the city depleted itself loudly. The meat markets smelled like prayers left out overnight. A rumor that cats cured coughs rolled down 3 streets and was swallowed whole. Riots started and were quashed with a sword's flat and then with the edge when the flat did not work. A priest of the Father preached order and was given the gift of very careful listening until 3 women without husbands stoned him with horse apples. Cersei fed the Golden Company and the Lannister men-at-arms under her banner, and she fed the Goldcloaks enough and no more, and she did not feed anyone else. She told herself this was the way of winning. She was not wrong. Jaime came to the siege quietly. He wore a plain cloak and rode a mare that had known better hay. Brienne was not with him. He had done his leaving in the night like a sin. He did not hide. He walked straight into the Dragon Queen's camp with his hood back because he did not want to be mistaken for a man creeping. And when the Unsullied crossed spears, he said, "Take me to your queen," and added, with a ghost of the insolence that had once been his skin, "or to your hand, if she is too busy." Tyrion looked at him for a long time in the tent where maps had replaced excuses. Jaime had not changed more than the rest of the world had changed him. He was thinner, his hair shorter, his face paler, his eyes hungrier for something he knew he could not have. "You took your time," Tyrion said, and poured wine. Jaime took the cup with his left hand and nodded at the acknowledgement. "I took roads that weren't watched," he said. "I watch all of them." Tyrion sipped and considered. "You intend to bargain?" Jaime's smile was tired. "I intend to try to give you a door through the wall my sister is certain of. More truth than that, and we'd need a larger tent." He looked at the map, at the little painted city that had been his whole universe too often. "You would starve her." "I would starve the idea that she must be obeyed because she's the only one who will hurt you enough to earn your fear," Tyrion said. He set the cup down. "Would you go in?" Jaime nodded, so slight it could have been a startle. "Davos used to know a way through the city by water." "He knows many ways," Tyrion said. "He is secretive about all of them, as all good men of the sea are. But he owes the city, and he will pay that debt to us. He will say it is payment to me. He lies less prettily than he thinks." He drew a breath. "You think you can get her to open the gates?" "I think I can ask her to surrender," Jaime said. "I think she will say no and call me something very old. After that, I don't know. I know that she would rather set the city on fire than give it to you if you were holding her son in your hands." "She has no son left," Tyrion said, and it hurt both of them. "She has gold. She has glass teeth. She has a monster she keeps on a chain because she likes to be reminded that she can." "I'm here to kill the monster," Jaime said. Tyrion flinched. He thought of Sandor Clegane sitting in the shade of a low wall outside the camp, wrapping old cloth about new scars, refusing the food that offended him because it had been cooked with spices he hated. He thought of the mountain who had died once and not learned from it. "He will kill you," Tyrion said. "Perhaps," Jaime said easily. "He's slow. He moves like memory. Memory hurts. There's a trick to it." He smiled again, which was worse. Davos took him upriver 2 nights later with 1 oarsman and a pole and silence. They slid past pickets who whispered to them in a code Davos had used since before Stannis had made him a lord. "I never thought I'd do this for a Lannister," Davos said. "The last time I brought a one-handed man into this city, it ended differently." "Everything does," Jaime said. They went under a low arch where the smell changed to old and damp. The oarsman made a face and kept rowing. They were in the city's veins. They bumped stone. Davos Arie. Chet up and felt for the rough of a mark that had been chiseled into the arch 20 years ago. He found it. He smiled without moving his mouth. Cersei received her brother at last because one does not ignore omens even when one has long chosen not to believe in them. She sent away the women who knelt to lace her stays and Qyburn with his gentle inquiries, and sat with her back to the window where the sound of the city came thin and dry. Jaime stood. He had not taken off his cloak. He looked deaf, the way men do when they cannot bear to hear the voices they love. "You're thinner," she said, because any other beginning would have been a lie. "You're thinner," he said, which was worse. She raised her cup and drank. "Say what you came to say, little brother." Her tongue slipped on the old habit and the old cruelty. He winced. "I came to ask you to surrender," he said simply. She laughed in the way women laugh when their throat refuses to recognize sound. "Of course you did," she said. "It's your one trick. Ask a woman to be reasonable because you love her. When she says she is reasonable already you call her mad because she does not want what you want." "There is no grain," he said. "I saw the streets. I smelled them. You'll kill the city and there will be nothing left for you to rule but bones." "I'll rule those," she said. "I have before." "You won't fool yourself that long," he said. "You run on hate, Cersei. Even hate trips if it runs hungry." She looked at him as if he were a boy. "You never understood," she said, almost regretful. "It was never hate. It was love. I loved my children. I loved our name. I loved the idea of being the thing that the world must walk around. Hate is loud. Love is quiet. I am very quiet now." She put her cup down carefully. "The city will hold. They will break. You'll burn it," he said. "Qyburn's jars." She blinked once. "I will use what I have," she said. He swallowed. "Then say goodbye now, Cersei." He went to the door and stopped, because there was still a boy in him who believed that another step would bring him into a different room where their mother waited with bread. "We made a child in a tower," he said, nonsense that meant too much. "I have held this city with my left hand and bled for it with my right. Let it go." "Go get yourself killed, Jaime," she said, because she could not bear the thing he had asked her to bear, and she had to hurt him to carry her own hurt. "Go play at hero with a monster you left dead once." She picked up her cup. "Leave me to do the thing men never do because they are too weak to be cruel." He bowed slightly. "As you wish," he said. Qyburn's birds, the children who had learned to mutter where Varys had taught them to sing, scurried with whispers in the days after. They told him in their shreds of idiom that there had been a new scent in the Red Keep that smelled like iron and old wood. They told him too that bakers' wives in the Crown's neighborhoods had begun to gather in corners without guards and to look toward a river that no longer gave them fish. Varys sent back notes wrapped around dried fruit. Some he sent toward the Golden Company's lines where it would be known they would be found. Strickland's steward began waking in the night with his heart running because someone had spoken too close to it. The first riot that mattered broke on the 9th day of the 2nd month. It began over onions and ended because men are made of water and blood, and the city had too little of both. The Goldcloaks killed 3 men and a woman and let their captain be pulled into the crowd so as not to risk more. They found him the next morning hanging from a street sign. Cersei did not go to see him. Qyburn did, and brought back the smell to her chambers because sometimes even men who lack imagination carry the reek of truth without knowing. "Stop the jars," she said abruptly that night while he unfolded plans the way a clerk unfolds sin. The words came out like a paper cut. Neat, quick, deadly despite size. "Your Grace." He blinked behind his lids. "No green fire," she said. "Not yet." He did not argue with her then, which won him the right to argue with her later. Tyrion stood in the tent of maps and wrote with an ink that looked like melted crow. He wrote to Tycho and sealed it with a dragon that had not yet been minted. He wrote to a man in the Golden Company who had once been a boy at the Rock and had loved the way the sun looked in the water when it rose in a certain pool. He wrote to a woman he had paid to be his friend and who had never pretended well but had never cheated him either. He wrote a statement of terms that offered the city mercy if it found a way to ask for it. Then he walked out into heat and dust and saw Sandor Clegane sitting on a stump as if he had grown there. "You're going to him," Tyrion said. Sandor kept his eyes on his hands. "I know where he'll be," he said. "He always liked heights." "He'll kill you," Tyrion said, surprised to hear himself repeating words. Sandor shrugged with his scarred shoulder. "Been dead before," he said. "Got better. Maybe I won't this time." The bloody world might enjoy the joke. "It's not a joke," Tyrion said. "No," Sandor said. "It's an ending." He stood. "You're doing it different," he said gruffly after a beat. "The city. You and the dragon woman. I thought you'd burn us all." "So did we," Tyrion said. "Say something nice about me when you tell the stranger I'm coming later than expected." Sandor snorted. "I don't talk polite to gods." He walked off toward a gate in the line that had been left unbarred for men who wished to go toward something they could not return from. Arya Stark watched him go. She had come to the siege because she had found that after she had killed a king of winter with a knife, she had more days left than she knew what to do with. She had said she would not go into the city this time. The city felt like a finished book, and she had learned to leave finished books closed. She watched Sandor until dust took him and then took a long breath and let it out as if she had been trying to hold all of herself in for a long time and had finally allowed a small piece out to look around. On the 26th day, The Golden Company did not receive its allotted sacks of flour. The quartermaster discovered this and raised his voice carefully to the steward, who raised his voice carefully to Strickland, who raised his voice carefully to his mirror when he shaved and carefully to the ceiling when he prayed. That afternoon, a man in plain clothes handed a letter to one of Strickland's captains. The letter spoke of delayed shipments and of a different contract in Dorne that would be handsomely fulfilled under a different queen. It also suggested that the sender knew where Strickland's steward's son was playing dice in Tyrosh and said that he would be safe so long as the steward did not walk a certain street at a certain hour in King's Landing. Strickland's lips went white. His men saw something like thought move across his face and were troubled. On the 30th day, the bells of the Red Keep rang. No one knew why for a long hour. The city leaned toward the sound the way a parched mouth leans toward a cup. Finally words seeped outward. Not surrender. Parley. A small gate, the old mud gate, beyond the Dragon Gate's killing fields. Cersei Lannister would not meet the Dragon Queen. She would be represented. So would Daenerys. Tyrion went. He insisted. Jon would have gone and Grey Worm would have gone and Davos would have gone. But Tyrion was the one who moved most easily among words and could see where they might strike and where they would only bruise. He walked with one guard and without armor, because armor makes even peace look like arrogance. On the other side of the low arch stood Qyburn, gray as a cat's carefulness, and with him the captain of the Goldcloaks, red-eyed. "My queen desires lasting peace," Qyburn said after the formalities had been exhausted by the heat. "She proposes that the city be recognized as sovereign by both parties and that all foreign armies withdraw, in exchange for which she will send to Dragonstone certain persons she is willing to forgive." "You propose that the North recede," Tyrion said lightly. "Or you propose poetry. I do not know which your queen loves more today." Qyburn's smile was sad. "The North is hungry for walls," he said. "Walls are expensive to feed." He gestured thinly toward the city. "Much like mouths." "Tell Cersei," Tyrion said, stepping closer so that they were two old men speaking privately, "that there is a woman in the city who lives in a little room above a cobbler's. She has a boy with one leg." He hopped once to the far end of a line for bread, and the girl he stood behind turned and pressed half her loaf into his hands because she knew him from before and remembered the way he made a face when he saw birds. "That girl is dead, and the boy is hungry, and the woman is wondering if she must now sell something that is not merchandise. Tell her that, Qyburn." He leaned in, put it into her glass ear. Qyburn inclined his head. "If you surrender," he said gently, "none of this need continue." Tyrion laughed, and it sounded like a chest with bad hinges. "We are stronger than you," he said. "We have dragons and food and friends who prefer silver to gold because it reflects cleaner. We will win. Ask your queen if she would like to choose the manner of her loss. It is a dignity I do not offer often." The next morning, a baker's wife opened her oven and found the sack Davos had promised through Varys, twice as heavy as it should have been and sealed with a blob of wax stamped with a little onion. She cried and fed two boys and then took half the sack to her sister because she was the sort of person who made cities. That night, Qyburn moved the jars. He had them taken from the worst parts of the city and carried under tarps up toward the Red Keep and the soldiers' home and the better streets where wine was still passed. He did this because he told himself that controlled fire is the servant that unruly fire missed being. He did not tell his queen. He did not need to. Her orders had specificity. His obedience had its own. The little birds watched him and told Varys that the jars had gone up toward wealth. Varys told Tyrion, and Tyrion papered over his fear with a plan. "We map them," he said. "Every place a jar rests we mark. We send men at night with buckets, and we take water from their own wells and pour it on their own fuses." "Wildfire doesn't quench," Davos said flatly. "Not wildfire," Varys said softly, and the word lifted in the tent like a bat. "He's moved accelerants. Oil. The green sleep stays. It is not the time he would choose to wake it." "We cannot save every alley," Tyrion said. "We can save the ones that will tell a better story when this is over." He touched the map. "Here, here, here. Brother-sisters row. The cobbler's stair. The tanner's court. If those burn, it will be the kind of fire that says the queen ate her children to feed herself. Daenerys came then, silent. She listened. She put her hand on Rhaegal's wing later and listened to a different heartbeat. Tyrion did not know if she was listening to him or to herself when she said, "We wait." On the 3rd day of the 3rd month, a cart bearing sacks tried to come in from the Rose Road under a banner that promised a treaty with House Redwine. It was stopped and turned and confiscated. The driver was found later with a bruised face and a bag of purses sewn under the cart's bed. He had written on a scrap of cloth the words, "I am sorry to my wife." The apology was not delivered. A gold cloak had taken the cloth to wrap his foot that had begun to rot. Sometimes mercy is a coin thrown in the wrong street. The breaking came quietly after weeks of noise. It came because men who had not been paid began to to men who wanted to pay them. It came because a woman gave half a loaf to a boy and had been seen by 3 other women. It came because Strickland's steward found a note under his cup one night and found his hand shaking when he read it. Not because it threatened his son, but because it did not. It offered coin honestly, up front, with terms dirt farmers understand. It came because Qyburn's jars sat in nice cellars under wines that smelled like summer, and men with parched tongues stood near those cellars and thought of matches. Strickland requested another parley. He did not attend. He sent 2 of his captains. They were clean, not because the city was, but because mercenaries do not trust filth not to eat their coin. They offered terms. They would open the King's Gate on the east side at dawn. Their men would withdraw. They would lay down arms in the street and march out under Araka's mercy. A clause that existed only in stories told to sellswords to keep them from dying needlessly. They asked for permission to keep their personal armor and their rings. They asked for a tariff exemption for 1 year after the war for Golden Company ships docking at King's Landing. Tyrion agreed to the rings and the armor and said he would recommend the tariff to the Queen's Council. He knew the Iron Bank would like that. At dawn, the King's Gate swung on hinges that had not squealed since Robert's time. The hinge pins fell, even the cotters had been greased at last. Grey Worm stood at the head of the Unsullied and watched men lay down their pikes and swords. He did not blink. The northern men watched, and some of them spat, because starving had made wolves of even the gentler ones. Jon said nothing and put his hand on one boy's shoulder when he made as if to move forward. The boy stopped. He had learned that much. Cersei learned it last. Qyburn told her with a voice as gentle as pillow feathers that the Golden Company had chosen coin over coin, and she looked toward the window and then away from it as if it had done something vulgar. She did not shout. She did not cry. She sat down. Then she stood up because she could not bear to be seen sitting. "Scorpions," she said. "Load them. All of them. If the dragons fly, I will take them with me." Qyburn spread his hands. "My queen," he said. "The scorpions cannot stop both. They can delay one. They can anger. Anger is not a plan." "Maybe it is," she said. She looked at the door. "Where is my brother?" "Gone into the city," Qyburn said. "To seek his end." "You should have said to betray me," she murmured. "It would have sounded better." She brushed past him and picked up her skirts because there were long stairs between her and the place where everything began or ended, and she intended to climb them. Pride and hate and love all make women tall when they mean to. On the wall, a gold cloak lifted his spear and lowered it. Below him, a woman with one shoe on stood with a bundle in her arms. She looked up, and he saw her mouth a prayer. He could not hear it. The light made her eyes no color. He thought of his own wife and of the baby she had buried last year, and then he thought of nothing at all because the order came down the line to loose, and he did, and the bolt thudded into a target he would never learn whether he had wanted to hit. This was not a moment history would consider him important enough to record. That is how the world puts its weight on men. Sandor Clegane climbed steps that had been worn smooth by 10 kings' feet and 10,000 servants scrubbing. He saw no servants. He saw men who had not known fear in so long they had mistaken it for scorn, trying to rediscover it in time to make it a shield. He shoved one aside. The man did not object. He found the hall with the long empty table where the kings had once eaten. He found a stair that spiraled toward a sound that had lived under his skin since childhood. The sound's name was Gregor. He did not say the name like a prayer. He said it like a brick. They met on a balcony that looked over the bay where once Tyrell banners had flown, and where now no banners flew because there were no masts left to fly them from. The sky was clean and hard. The mountain stood in his armor that had never had a name because men who make themselves into no men do not need names. His eyes showed less than the sea shows when it thinks of storms. Qyburn said something polite and not very interesting. The mountain did not look at him. Cersei came and watched and felt something in her at last she did not recognize and feared, which was understanding. Sandor spat. "You die," he said. The mountain did not reply. He stepped forward and made the world smaller. Sandor made it smaller too, which is how men do when they fight monsters. They make the future into a very short rope and pull on it until it breaks or takes them somewhere. They were not pretty. There is nothing to say here that songs would want. They broke parts of each other with a careful, steady kindness that only men who have hated their whole lives can wield. The mountain was slow and sure. Sandor was less sure, which made him quicker. He bled. The mountain bled less. It did not matter. It mattered. Sandor fell. He got up. He drove a blade into his brother. He did not find a heart worth the name. He laughed and cried and did not know which was which. He took the only option monsters give. He brought both of them to the edge. He took the edge with him. They fell. It took too long because that's what falling does when men have spent a life on edges. They struck stone and lied to the stone about not being dead for a while. Then they were. Cersei stood and let the part of her heart that had been a girl on a balcony once when the world was simpler look down and say, "So that's done then." She wanted to turn and go to Jaime and tell him it had been for them, and knew that was another finished book she'd have to leave closed. Tyrion came into the Red Keep through the old servant's way a half-hour later with 5 Unsullied, one of whom carried a bag of sand and one of whom carried a bucket of water because old habits die harder than men. He found Qyburn in the hall with the long table, and they looked at one another and remembered when they had been 2 clever men working for 2 terrible kings. Qyburn bowed. Tyrion nodded. "Where is she?" he asked. "Going up," Qyburn said. "Because going down would be surrender." Tyrion wiped his face. He was sweating and he was afraid, which meant that he was thinking too clearly. "There is nothing at the top," he said. "There is a small balcony and a long drop. She is not the sort to choose it." He walked on. He found Jaime first, or Jaime found him. They stood in a narrow corridor where once the smell of roast meat would have soaked the stone. Jaime's face was white with dust and some of it was not dust. He looked as if he had been crying or sweating, which is the same thing on the right faces. "Clegane," he said. "I know," Tyrion said. They did not embrace. There was no time. They moved together as if the years between childhood and this corridor had been a trick. They found Cersei in a room that had been her father's once when he had been alive and had not known it was a kindness done to the world that he would die. She was standing with her hands on the back of a chair, as if a king would come in at any moment and ask her for advice. She looked at Jaime and made a face he could not bear. Then she made a face she could. "So," she said, "you've come to watch me end." "I've come to stop you setting the city on fire," Tyrion said. She smiled. "I was never going to," she said. "I wanted you to worry that I would because you deserve to worry." She took her hands off the chair. "You know me so well, little brother, you should know when I lie." "I do," he said. "But I do not always know when you tell the truth. That is what has made you dangerous." He stepped forward. "It's over, Cersei. The Golden Company is gone. The gates are open. The dragons have not burned your people. Your scorpions sit like statues. Come down. Give me the keys. Live." She laughed a short sound that was nearer sob than she liked. "Live for what?" she asked. "To be paraded? To be told I am mercifully not burned? To have your lover from the east stand beside you and wear my rooms? To live," he said, "because sometimes all men can manage is the obvious and sometimes it is enough. To look at the sea again and say to it what you could not say to me." He shrugged. "Or to look at nothing in a cell, but alive." She looked at Jaime. "Will you come with me if I go down?" she asked. "Yes," he said. He did not hesitate, which is what saved her. They went down the long stairs. The city did not burn. That had never been the plan, and the plan had had room for other horrors, but this one it did not get. Cersei walked like a queen even when she had ceased to be one. At the foot of the stairs, Unsullied waited with spears not quite leveled and not quite at rest, in the exact posture of men obeying a woman who asked them to be better than the world. Tyrion stood and held out a key that was not a real key but that part of a man that is asked for when a city changes hands. She took it because she would not give him the satisfaction of refusing it. She handed it back a moment later because she was practical when she could not be cruel. There had been no slaughter because there had been no order to slaughter. There had been fighting in streets the way statistics fight, in corners with grim silence. There had been men who used the chaos to take women. There had been others who used the chaos to stop them. There had been thieves and saints, and most of the city had been both in an afternoon. The bells did not ring until much later, and when they did it was because Daenerys had told a woman to tell a man to tell another man to pull a rope. The sound went out over the roofs like something being forgiven. The city opened its mouth and breathed for the first time in weeks. Daenerys stood in the square before the Red Keep with Drogon behind her like a mountain that had chosen, for courtesy's sake, not to be a mountain. Rhaegal dozed, wing heeling, eye half opened. The square smelled like piss and sweet rot and victory trying hard not to be pride. Tyrion came to her with dust in his beard and exhaustion making him honest. "It's done," he said. "She's yielded. The city has given itself rather than have itself taken." Daenerys looked over his shoulder at the woman in white and red and dust who had been the answer to all his problems for so long that he had forgotten what the question looked like. "Thank you," she said to Tyrion. "Now hold me to the thing I said I wanted." "What thing was that?" he asked soft. "To be a different story," she said. They took Cersei to a room where she could sit and drink wine that did not taste of fear and where the windows were barred. She watched the city move under her like ants. Jaime sat across from her and did not hold her hand because he had learned at last that he could not be the person he had been when that had been the right answer. He told her about rivers and snow and the way a field looks under a different sun. She listened because she had run out of other sounds. Varys sent orders that had been written the month before, because his way of kindness is to expect it early. Grain came down the Blackwater in small boats under banners that Tyrion had designed to look humble. The gates took them like mouths take soup after illness. The baker's wife who had received the onion-stamped sack opened her oven again, and this time the bread she slid out looked like hope does when it has got a little overeager. The Golden Company marched away under the Araka's mercy they had been promised. The city watched them go. The city had learned to keep its opinions to itself until wine had taught it to share them. The Iron Ban. Kay sent a letter with 3 lines and a seal that had always reminded Tyrion of a man with no face. It said, politely, that the bank would be willing to re-examine certain arrangements in light of new realities. Davos laughed and said, "They smell coin in the wind like dogs." Tyrion agreed and poured him another cup because dogs deserve bones when they're honest. Jon stood on the wall and watched the sky the way men do when they need to look at something larger, so they do not have to look at something inside them. Daenerys came to stand beside him. They had become very good at standing beside each other and not touching. "You did not burn them," he said. He did not smile. He looked like a man who wanted to and had remembered something and put it away. "I did not," she said. "They will remember," he said. "They will forget," she said. And there was no bitterness in it. She knew the nature of stories. "And then I will have to teach them again. But I will teach them this way if I can. And if I cannot, I will consider your counsel. And I will consider my dragons." They both looked at Drogon, who was scratching himself on a tower. He looked back with an expression that was either irritation or amusement. It is difficult to tell with dragons. Tyrion went to Cersei's cell with a jug and 2 cups because if one Lannister is going to be petty about wine with another, then the world has not yet ended. She looked at him as if he were a mirror that showed her the thing vanity cannot. Truth. "You hate me," she said. "I do not," he said. "I hate the way you are better than anybody alive because it is my way, too." She drank, and it ran a little down her lip. Once that would have been a weapon. Now it was a fact. "What will they do with me?" she asked. "They will put you on a ship," he said. You will go to a place that is not here. Your name will learn to be smaller. Maybe you will like being able to walk streets and be only whispered about. Maybe not. It is not my business to say. You should have burned me, she said. It would have been the sort of tidy end you like. I do not like tidy ends, he said. They cheat the mess that got us there. He looked at her. I killed father because I could not live crushed under him. He was not a monster. He was just better at crushing than other men. You were not a monster. You were just better at being what you are than any woman I have ever met. In another world I would have been proud. And that is the worst thing I can say. She laughed, and that was how they said goodbye. The city healed because that is what cities do when left to themselves and given a few carts of grain. The watermills were repaired. Varys's birds flew away and then back older. The Goldcloaks learned to ask for bread before coin when they took bribes. And a baker's boy who had grown from string to wire started to whistle again. A priest who had been brave and foolish at the wrong times married two people who would never have liked each other under normal weather. The great September's ruin grew weeds that flowered white, and someone started leaving little bones wrapped in blue cloth at the place where the mother's altar had been. Yara took her longships and went raiding in the old way along coasts that were no longer guarded well by a man who thought himself king. She did it with a lighter heart than she had had in years, and sometimes woke in the night and saw her uncle's face underwater. She did not feel guilt. She felt the sea take what it wanted. She gave some of it back. That was new. Davos found himself master of ships because life likes irony. He sat in a room that had once held dragons in chains and stacked lists and learned to love ink. He put his head in his hands sometimes and saw a boy with a little bag and a desperate smile. He saw a king with a hard jaw and a smaller heart than he had wished. He forgave himself as much as a man can. Grey Worm drilled his men until the dust rose and then stopped because he realized that the dust had come from a street where a woman had just washed. He nodded at her. She nodded back. They did not speak. Missandei took afternoon walks where old walls kept the heat. Children who had collars once and wrists still remembered that touched one finger to the back of their necks when they passed her and then forgot to because forgetting is beautiful when it is earned. She corrected one scribe's spelling and wrote a letter to her mother's memory and cried in private and came out dry-eyed like a queen. Varys smiled sometimes at nothing, which meant he had heard something delicious and tender. He ate less than he had. He made plans that were boring on purpose because he had grown to hate the thrill that comes when men think they are about to outfox someone. He started to sleep 2 hours at a time with the window open. Jaime rode north with Brienne eventually. It took him a long time to ask and a long time to find her and a long time to say anything. They did not fix what had been broken because some things are not puzzles. They found new ways to use the broken pieces. He learned to hold a shield with his left hand without being clumsy. She learned that some promises can be made to a person who is very far away and still be kept. Cersei took ship one gray morning. She wore no finery, and a few people recognized her and flinched, and nobody threw anything because fear takes an odd shape when it's no longer enforced by sword points. She stood at the rail and watched the city shrink. She said nothing. The captain, who had smuggled onions once, told her that the sea was always colder than men remembered. She did not answer. She was remembering a boy who had jumped from a window because he could not find where he had left himself. She had put men in their places for years. She could not put memory in its place. It went where it liked. Daenerys took the throne. It had to be done. It looked wrong under her for a while because she had made her name. Not sitting but moving. She sat anyway. She made laws that were simple first and then less simple. She told the city that it would feed the poor first. She told the soldiers that if they took more than their share, she would take from them something they liked. She told Tyrion she would listen, and then she did. She sent the dragons out over the sea for long flights, and when they came back they smelled like rain. When she sat at night, she did not light a fire unless it was cold. She had learned to be careful with fires. Tyrion stood with her on the balcony one night and they breathed together. The city murmured below them like a creature in sleep, and for the first time since he had stood on a cliff, he thought he could rest on the sound. "You promised to hold me to what I wanted," Daenerys said. "Have I failed?" "You have been a story different enough that it hurt to put down," he said. She smiled. You speak as if the ending were written. He shook his head. The only ending I know is the one in which we all look small from a height. That has already been done. It turns out to be a relief. He thought of the barrels and of the fog and of a grin over a knife. He thought of a boy with one leg. He thought of a woman who had refused to burn a city because she had decided to learn patience as if it were a language. He raised his cup over the sleeping roofs. To the sea, he said, and paused. And to hunger when it teaches. Daenerys touched her cup to his. To fire when it kneels, she said. In the alleys of King's Landing, children learned new games. They had a song they sang that had no words, only a rhythm of claps. Boom, hush, crack, hush, hush. If asked, they would tell you it was about the night the ships burned and the dragons didn't. They liked the hush best. It felt like the holding of breath before a surprise that turned out to be a gift. Years later, an old man told his granddaughter that once a queen had taken a city and it had not burned. The granddaughter made a face because that sounded like a lie a man tells when he wants a child to think better of the world than it deserves. The old man laughed softly and did not argue. He showed her a scar on his hand where a scald had kissed him when he tried to steal soup. Still hurts when it rains, he said, and rubbed it. The rain's worth it, mind. He looked up and listened to the gulls and smelled tar and bread. Some things teach that way. The sea went on kneading the shore. The rocks took who they wanted and let most go. A man who had been hand and monster and brother and fool stood there sometimes and let the water's voice be the only one. He had learned something. It had cost more than he had. He had offered it to a woman who carried fire and asked her to be stubborn in a way that would disgust poets. She had been. That was why he could stand and listen without counting the names the sea still kept. And in the Red Keep, which had never been redder than when it looked on rise and fall and called both its own, a woman with white hair sat with a child on her knee and told a story of ships burning in fog and of dragons who waited because their mother told them to. The child yawned in the exact rhythm of the old clapping game. Is it true? The child asked. It is a story, the woman said. It is true so long as we keep telling it. She kissed the child's head. Tomorrow I will tell you the one about the man who thought you could buy honor with coin and learned you can only rent it by the day, and even then it's late sometimes. What is honor? The child asked. Something you are hungry for that bread cannot touch, the woman said gently. Eat before it. Hunger is loud. Honor whispers. You need to be strong to hear it. The child frowned. Will the dragons come again? Far away, a dark shape beat a bigger night into the night and a different rhythm. They will, the woman said. They will, as long as we give them somewhere to land. The days settled into the work that comes after a storm, the sorts of days Tyrion Lannister had always suspected were the true measure of kings and queens. Victory had its thunderclap. Rebuilding made a quieter noise that never quite stopped. He woke early and went to sleep late and learned again the weight of pen and seal. He counted barrels of grain with Davos before breakfast and listened to Varys's birds whisper news that sounds like rumor until it becomes law by repetition. He walked markets where the first carts of barley flour arrived and watched men pretend not to be moved to tears by a coarse loaf handed for the first time in weeks without a knife hovering nearby. He sent letters north and south and east, and wrote his name more than he had as a captive in a dark cell. He dreamed, when he found a brief patch of sleep, of keys. The iron sort, the river sort, the sort made of words. They found the first hidden store of oil by smell. It lived inside a tannery under the fishmonger's street, brick and barrel, a wet cold that clung to the bones. Davos led them down like a man who had learned to love cellars because cellars had saved him. Tyrion followed with a hooded lantern and too many memories of another substance in tight, secret places. The Alchemists' Guild sent 2 of their careful brothers, old men with the meticulous hands of rats and the piety of cats. One of them, thin and papery, introduced himself as Haleen. "We served your father," he said vaguely, and his eyes slid away when Tyrion said, "You serve. Demi too," once more directly. "Things are best handled by those who know their work," Haleen added, which might have been apology or defiance. Davos sniffed the damp and grunted. "I know tar," he said. "It would marry wildfire if given the chance." He touched a barrel's stave with 2 fingers and drew them back oily. Old rope and bad lids. Qyburn used what he had. He swapped the lantern to his other hand. We'll thin it, move it, drown enough to be sure. Not drown, Helene squeaked. You make water angry with it. Better to move it gently with blankets and straw, and then, far away. Far away to where? Tyrion asked. We have vaults, Helene said. We are licensed again, under the current administration. He bowed shallowly and drew a map from his sleeve like a conjurer. His trembling finger traced streets as if they were veins. Here, here, and here, old caches from Ares's time that we could not reach easily when the September broke. And here, he tapped neatly. Qyburn did not trust our inventory. He made his own. How many jars of the Green Dream do you still have? Tyrion asked, not because he wanted numbers, but because he wanted to watch the alchemist's face when he answered. Helene swallowed. Enough to remind kings of humility, he whispered. Not enough to rule by it. We are not fools. Not fools, Davos muttered. The fools are dead. They carried barrels up the narrow stair, the sort of labor that makes men honest. The air sharpened as they climbed, and the day narrowed to heave and step. Heave and step. Once a rung cracked under a raider's weight, and the man fell back into the arms of 2 others who cursed and laughed with the relief of it. At the top, a child watched with big eyes and a hand on her brother's sleeve to keep him from darting forward. Davos tipped his chin to her. You keep your feet dry, he said, which in his mouth was blessing and command both. While one part of the city carried oil in daylight, another part shouldered fear up the hill. Qyburn stood before the queen in a chamber that had held worse men than him and yet had smeared less of the world with their fingers. His hands disappeared into his sleeves as if he could lose them there and be spared what they had done. Tyrion had thought he might feel triumph. He felt instead the familiar weariness of looking at a man who had let cleverness grow into a god and then claimed the god's crimes as piety. You were demastered, Tyrion began. For what is the Citadel's phrase? Unbecoming experiment. Unlicensed curiosity? Qyburn corrected softly and smiled his dry smile. They fear curiosity. It makes men younger than they are. You made a corpse stand, Tyrion said. You put children in shadows to listen for your benefit. You salted the city's cellars with oil and powder and spoke of teaching fire to be civilized. You counseled a queen to rule by physics. Qyburn inclined his head. And you, he said, ordered wildfire on a river and called it salvation. All methods offend until they are used for the right side. The right side, Daenerys said, speaking from a bench because she understood the weight of words more when she Saturday, is the side with the living on it. She gestured. There is justice in you somewhere, Qyburn. I am trying to locate it. I am trying to find the part of your mind that felt pity enough to tell us where you hid the oil. Was that pity, or merely the wish to bargain? I like cities, Qyburn said simply. I like their conversations. I prefer them unburned. If you wish me to call that pity, I will, your grace. Tyrion felt heat rise along the back of his neck. You do not get to name your virtues, he said. We do. Qyburn folded in, somehow smaller and stiffer at once. You will kill me, he said. Do it, then. I have grown bored with explaining myself to men who pretend they don't also love knives. Grey Worm did it because there are certain acts that belong to the state and he had learned to endure their grip. It was not cruel. It was exact. He set the blade. He spoke the words he had learned in another language that said the doing was being owned by the deed's necessity, not by his own preference, and he cut when Daenerys inclined her head. Qyburn's mouth tried to be clever until the last. Then it was simply a mouth. Varys watched without blinking and later fed 3 of the man's little bird's pie and told them stories about kings who learned to listen. The Iron Bank's envoy arrived with a ship a week later, sliders gleaming, men buttoned even in heat. Tycho Nestoris walked as if the air owed him its shape. He greeted Tyrion as an old acquaintance and Daenerys as if he were meeting a noble river introduced by a tributary he trusted. He did not grease his words. He did not need to. He set up ledgers on Davos's polished table and watched them like a father with a child who had cost him much. "You will forgive me," he began. "It is not that Braavos forgets gratitude. It is that Braavos remembers very precisely exactly to whom it owes money, at what rate, by which hour. Your predecessor paid handsomely, if late. We prefer not to go to war with arithmetic, but we have, and we know who wins." "What does the bank need?" Daenerys asked, and this was why Tyrion loved her. She had learned not to ask what it wanted. "Stability disguised as opportunity," Tycho said. "Build your harbor. We will lend you the means to do it. Remit to us the customs for 7 years. He looked at Davos as if to be sure that years meant the same here as in Braavos. "You will lower tariffs for our ships by a measure set by a panel we appoint. In exchange, you will enjoy the luxury of knowing your docks are sound when the next storm comes. Rather than praying and lending your expectation to gods we do not keep accounts for." "We are prey to storms," Davos allowed. "We prefer to be prey that swims." Tyrion tapped the page where Tycho had drawn a set of figures neat as pins. "We can do all this," he said, "provided our friends in the Reach will sell us timber at less than it costs to sing to trees, and provided you do not ask for the blood of peasants in place of coin when a harvest fails." Tycho twitched a smile. "We do not drink blood," he said mildly. "It makes a poor ledger entry, but we will ask for something if you are late. We collect our lateness in influence if we cannot in silver." "Then you will be bored," Daenerys said. "We intend to be prompt." She held Tycho's gaze until his eyes admitted the calculation that had lived there from the door. This queen was not a man drunk on a symbol carved from iron. She was a woman who understood that money built walls faster than speeches. They signed. The pens scratched like small claws. Davos made a face at the sound and told himself it would be a better music when the new docks pulled fish into baskets. Varys blew on the wax until the dragon's head hardened, and later whispered into the wind about red wine casks and Ashford sawmills and how coin travels better when it smells like spice. A raven came from Winterfell with feathers in good repair. Sansa's hand was firm and cool, as if she had pressed a winter leaf to the parchment while writing and the sap had seeped in. To Queen Daenerys of House Targaryen, the North has bled for crowns that did not warm us. It has burned for wars named after other men's fathers. We ask what we asked before. Leave us to ourselves. What we will give, we will give. I would rather return winter suits of good wool than swear away our heir. We are not enemies. We prefer being neighbors to being subjects. Sansa, who was once of House Stark and is that still." Tyrion read the letter twice. He had always admired her. She had learned to write like someone who had been forced to learn how to listen before speaking. He took it to Daenerys without comment. He trusted her these days more than he trusted his own rhetoric. Daenerys read it and then looked north out of sheer habit, as if by squinting she could see over leagues of hills and river and sudden wood. "She is right," she said. "We gain more from a friend who does not resent us than from a subject who will undermine us slowly. I thought once I wanted the whole. I do not wish to eat more than I can hold." She smiled sideways at him. "You can call that wisdom. I'll call it appetite." He bowed a fraction. "There is other precedent," he said. "Yara has asked again for what she won before. Freedom to stink of fish under her own sky. Yara will have it. She does not dream of sowing barley inland. She dreams of the sound of oars and of storms to test her. She will keep the stepstones cleaner than a priest's conscience and call it piracy." Daenerys folded the letter. "We will have a council. We will ask the realm to look at itself and say out loud what it is. They held it in the dragon pit because it had been built precisely to hold dangerous things, and words had teeth. The burned ribs of the roof framed the sky, a skeleton that had forgotten to die. Lords came wary and unlikely. Yohn Royce ironed stiff into buckles. Edmure Tully with a little extra fat at his jaw that might have been peace beginning to grow. A woman from Dorne wearing thin linen and a secret, her accent sliding through the air without apology. A boy with the title of Lord of the Vale who looked taller and broader and less likely to be blown away by a cross breeze, with Royce's hand light at his elbow. A red wine with wine on his breath and graphs in his head of the arbors. Casks. A high tower with the cool of a man who floats because the water is under him socially and literally. Gendry came wearing clothes that did not know what to make of his shoulders. He looked wrong and right at once, as if a smith had been asked to pretend to be a prince and had refused to stop liking steel. Tyrion spoke until his throat rasped. He did not try for poetry. He defined and asked and sketched. Daenerys listened and measured. She had learned that a queen's strongest words are the ones she says after others have weighed the air. The North went first. The North, Daenerys said, has kept a wall for 1,000 years. It has kept it with its own blood more often than not. The North will rule itself. It will give what it chooses. It will be our ally when our allies are needed and our absence when an absence is kinder. Sansa had not come. She had sent Brienne with the words and a nod that stood for trust. Brienne, enormous and quiet, stepped forward and bowed not too low. "Winterfell thanks your grace," she said, and would have left it there if Tyrion had not seen something like warmth pass under her sternness when Daenerys smiled back. Yara took her piece of the air next without waiting to be invited, because that was her way. "The Iron Islands are as they are," she said loudly. "We want your markets and not your laws. We'll call in storms rather than kneel in a parlor. In return, we'll cut any throat you point to at sea and hang their banners from our masts." She was all bad manners and good faith. Daenerys nodded, and the Ironborn stamped spear butts and grinned like wolves that had learned the word truce without ever lessening their teeth. For the Riverlands, Edmure tried to make a speech and then gave up and laughed at himself, and the dragon pit laughed with him, and in the laughter the realm remembered it had once been capable of forgiving men for being men. "I would like my home back," he said, and somebody in the back called, "About time," and it was like a rain on dry ground, and a little respect for the rivers at planting time, and fewer soldiers trampling our weirs and calling it war. "You'll have your weirs," Daenerys said, "and when the planting needs hands, we'll send them from the Crownlands, and when their harvest is good, you'll send the city bread. Do not make me a liar." "We'll try not to," Edmure said, which was as honest as a vow could be. "The Stormlands, no one to speak for them," until Tyrion gestured to the clumsy giant of a boy beside him. "Gendry of Flea Bottom," he said, and watched Gendry flinch at the old name and then grow into it. "If a storm must be ended, best to give it a man who knows what it is to lift a hammer and go on lifting when his hands crack." Gendry cleared his throat. "If I say the words and stand on the walls and try not to be a fool," he said, "will you let me be what I am? Im no curtie. I like heat and the ring of iron. I know the shape of the keep." He dropped his eyes. "And my father's name." "Names are less important than what they buy other people," Daenerys said. "I name you Baratheon of Storm's End, Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, on condition that you pay particular attention to the cost of nails when the harbor's rebuilt." And with that she had earned him twice, as a noble and as a smith, which was the way to make a man's loyalty endure when his name might not. For the Vale, Ser Yon Royce delivered courtesy dressed in iron. The boy at his side nodded when he asked him to and stood straight otherwise. The Vale would remain the Vale. It would send grain down its mountain roads when the passes were clear and men when honor called and honor could be verified. Daenerys told him she approved of verification and he smiled, which for him was nearly a hug. Dorne's envoy said few words and all of them sweet and edged. "The prince is new and old both," she said. "We keep our independence. We keep our roads clear of your carts and yours clear of ours. We expect to meet for wine when the olives ripen." "We will," Daenerys said, and left it at that because Dorne's pride is its own border. The reach was harder. Tyrion felt the great vacancy where the Tyrell roses had once fattened and stung, and wondered as he always did if the realm was a garden that could feed itself without one loud, clever matron telling it when to grow. He did not press. He asked Hightower to bring their assembly at Oldtown to a decision. "Choose a warden you can stomach," he said. "We will live with your choice. If it is wisdom, we will praise it. If it is folly, we will forgive it once." The Westerlands made eyes at Tyrion. He looked back and put his goblet down, so that his hands would be free to show they were empty. "I will not sit the rock," he said. I will not have the West holding its breath to see whether the one who killed his father will crush it too. Choose one of my cousins. There are many. Jenna's boy has decent teeth. Davin is brave. I will sign away my claim in ink that can be seen from the moon. He felt Daenerys's eyes and braced for the pity he feared in her. She gave him instead respect, which is a better bomb skilled enough to look like nothing. When it was done, the dragon pit held more ease than it had when they filed in. Men get drunk on settlement as thoroughly as on wine. The common folk who had climbed to watch from the broken rim drifted down with the sense that the world might hold steady long enough to mend shoes. Tyrion let himself lean back on his chair and consider the shape of things. He noticed that Arya Stark had sat high and silent, and that when the last pledge had been spoken she had stood and slipped out like something unpinned. He went to find her and did, near a low wall where wildflowers had made a decision to grow without asking permission. She had her hands behind her and was watching a bumblebee try to argue with the idea of a blossom. You never liked watching people talk, he said. I liked watching them talk less when the talking had to do with me, she said. They are good at keeping themselves alive. That is a sort of bravery. Her eyes tilted toward the west the way some men's eyes tilt toward inns. I liked the sea, she said abruptly. It keeps going. That recommends it. Plenty of places to kill your enemies out there, too, he said dryly, because sometimes he and she spoke easiest when their words had a little sand. She smiled slightly. Out there I don't know the words for enemy yet. That recommends it more. She glanced up at him, as if to see if he would call her a child and therefore angry. I'll go, I think, west, while there's still more west to find. You could stay and be a sort of princess, he said. I'm good at killing and I'm good at leaving, she said. Princesses need to be good at staying. She straightened. Tell your queen thank you for not becoming the thing people wanted her to be so they could hate her more honestly. She touched her fingers to her brow in a shape that was not quite a salute. And tell your onion knight he still owes me more onions. He promised once. Tyrion promised. He watched her go with the light hearts always have when they have made a decision that fits them. She packed at dusk and slipped down to the quay at dawn and took a ship that liked horizons. The city woke and felt nothing shift, and later, when someone told a story about the girl who had stabbed Winter in the eye, more than one man swore he had seen her wave from a stern rail. Tyrion knew better. She had not waved. She was already looking past them. The Dothraki did not love walls. They tolerated them because their Khaleesi asked and because grief had given them a different hunger than plunder. They camped beyond the King's Road in a rolling sprawl of tents that breathed dust and horse. Their ponies learned the Crownlands grass. The Crownlands learned that grass can be planted again. Missandei spent her mornings in a makeshift pavilion, translating law into the throat's music and the throat's music back into law. Rules were not easy, and they did not pretend to be. A young rider with a stomach for boasting took an apple from a girl's stall without paying and laughed, and Grey Worm made him stand in the heat holding the apple on his palm for an hour without eating it. Then he made him pay double. Then he made him give the apple back. The boy swore and spat and later ate 4 apples quietly to Missandei's table and did not call it apology. At twilight Daenerys sat on a low bench under a canvas and let the men of the sea speak to her. One bent at the waist and steadied his words as if they were a foal newly foaled. Khaleesi, he said, sky does not stop. You ask horse to stop. We do it if told. But in our heads we ride. She listened until the rider's tongue tired, and only then spoke. You have lived by taking, she said. Now you will live by keeping. Keep these roads safe. Keep these fields quiet. When my messengers go, ride with them so that no one aches for stolen children. When the rains come, move your tents so that the ground rests. When harvest comes, help carry. That is how we feed dragons. And that is how we feed you. She had learned to speak like that, dry and clean, and the men listened because the words were unfamiliar and their strangeness pleased them. She let 10 ships sail east with 100 riders who had graves to visit and songs to finish. She watched them go with something in her that pulled, like a heart when it hears a voice in another room. They'll come back, Missandei said softly. The sea keeps those it wants, Daenerys said. We have learned to bargain with it. It will return enough. Bronn arrived one day with a swagger and a crossbow because habits outlive sense, and Tyrion's guards moved as one. He raised both hands and not the weapon, and laughed without heat. "If I meant to shoot, you'd not have noticed until I'd done it," he said cheerfully. "Put the things down. I came to ask for a castle, not to decorate one." "Who sent you?" Tyrion asked, flat. "My stomach," Bronn said. "And the last letter from a Lannister not written by a gull." He nodded toward Jaime, who stood in the back of the hall with his shoulders uncompromised by armor. "Him and you. You said you'd pay me once for saving your skins when dragons and bells made a mess of the world. I've come to collect before you forget what you cost." Jaime half smiled despite himself. "You were going to kill us," he said. "Only if it paid better," Bronn replied with a shrug. "It didn't. It doesn't. I like you both. That helps. But I like a roof more." Daenerys watched him the way a cat watches a small dog that might or might not be amusing. "You threaten my hand," she said, "and then ask me for a keep. I negotiate with a man who has promised to pay me and has a habit of living past his debts," Bronn corrected. "If he says yes, I'll serve you. If he says no, I'll serve someone else until I like them less." "Truth from a cell's word," Davos murmured. "Mark this day with white stones." Tyrion rubbed his eyes. He had known since he woke a certain morning in a brothel years ago that some debts travel faster than men. "Stokeworth," he said at last. "You remember it. Lady Tanda is dead, and her daughter's husband proved more interested in his own grave than in her safety. The lands are modest, the keep small, the walls poor and mendable. Take them. In exchange you'll take the city watch. The Goldcloaks put the wrong men to the sword last month. They need a captain who knows how to tell an honest bribe from the sort that rots the floor under a house." Bronn's eyes brightened a shade at honest bribe. "And if I say I want the big one, the garden full of peaches, the one I can't see the ends of, then I will say you've never heard the word curse in a northern accent," Tyrion said. "Take Stokeworth. Make it fat without making the city thin. Keep the watch from turning into a marketplace." He glanced at Daenerys, who nodded once, having read Bronn's weight the way one reads a measure on a scale. Not flattering, not forgiving, exact. Bronn slung the crossbow with visible care. "Done," he said. "I'll need coin to pay the lads to be less what they are." "You'll guess how much," Tyrion said. "Don't make me ask." Bronn grinned. "You'll ask. You like to. But I'll keep the asking modest." He arched a brow. "And there's a little matter of a title to set the ladies in a patient mood." "Lord Stokeworth," Tyrion said, as if saying so made it always have been so. "Try not to disgrace it." "I wouldn't know where to start," Bronn said honestly, and it was exactly the answer Tyrion had bought. News from the north rode south slowly because the roads were full of carts and not war. Jon stood at the top of the wall that was no longer necessary in the way it had been but remained necessary for other reasons, and let the wind make his eyes water suitably enough that he could blame it for what he felt. Tormund had taken his people further, toward trees that still pretended to be untouched by everything that had happened. The children had become a story even to those who had met them. Ghost ran and returned and leaned warm against his knee at night. In the mornings Jon watched the crows fuss over nothing and felt envy for their stupid quarrels. Letters came and were answered. Daenerys wrote, "Come back when your roads have thawed." He wrote, "I will when the fences hold by themselves." Sansa sent a basket to King's Landing of smoke-dried fish sealed in wax and a note that said only the honest gifts travel this well. Tyrion held it like a small victory and asked the cook to serve them with parsnips, which made Varys raise an eyebrow so high it nearly became hair. She listened as if he were telling her something about dragons. He blushed and kept peeking. It was not all order. A man with grief in him found a match in a cellar and decided to show the world how much a pain can throw flame. The oil there was old. The wood around it was older. The street was a throat. Fire ran like a rumor until it burned into truth that bit. The tanner's quarter lit with a hungry purr. And for a moment the city held its breath much as it had the day the September had turned to light and dust. Tyrion's heart made an old move in his chest, and he stumbled toward the nearest pump like a boy returning to a house where he had once been loved poorly. Drogon's shadow fell first. It crossed the street, and men lifted their heads and cursed and cheered, confused and grateful. Daenerys came down out of the clean sky and made fire into a wall where it would do the least harm, eating space so that the hungry blaze could not walk further. Regal, wings stiff and still mending, came low and through dirt with his big body's drag. Missandei sent a chain of buckets like a song. Grey Worm directed men into lines as neat as any spear wall and broke the blaze where a water trough made a barrier. Children with wet rags over their mouths watched a dragon blow a little fire on a cord of wood left on the wrong side of a shop so that it would burn fast, fall, and block a lane. Laughter came out of a woman like an accident. "He saved my mother's house," she told the first person who would stop to listen, and he told 3 men who told 10, and for a week after, people put out apples on their sills without knowing that they meant thanks. That night the city slept and woke and slept without nightmares. A baker dared to ask Daenerys to bless his oven, and she thought of refusing and then did not. She put her hand on the hot brick and closed her eyes and whispered something that had nothing to do with gods. When she opened them, the baker was crying. Tyrion found himself crying too, later, and blamed the heat. Cersei's ship reached Braavos, and the city did not bow for the queen who had once made other cities imagine bending. It did not hate her. It barely noticed. That was punishment enough for a woman who had built her days from attention. She rented a room overlooking a canal and watched men more powerful than any she had bribed trudge under accounts. She spilled wine and wanted to call servants and discovered they did not come for a voice anymore. She learned to barter in a market where fishmakers did not care whose wife you had been. She took to walking at dusk by the Titan's shadow and thought about jumping. Not because she wanted to die, but because she wanted to choose at least once what happened to her body. She did not jump. Jumping is a shout, and she had learned that sometimes whispers hurt more and last longer. She received letters from Lannister cousins that read like prayers to a god that had ceased to listen. She wrote none back. The Iron Bank sent her a polite note asking if, now that she had no realm to say it for her, she made any statements. She burned the letter and then laughed because it had burned so fast and because it had felt good to do something that didn't matter. Jaime did not sail after her. He rode, slowly, up the Rose Road with Brienne and learned to measure time by the way the air tasted at different turns. He found his humor again in patches and kept it safe like a coin. Once, at an inn where the beams had been hewn by an honest man 2 centuries prior, he told Brienne a joke so old that even in Lannisport it had dust on it. She snorted wine out her nose and then tried to pretend she hadn't. He handed her a cloth and said nothing. In the mornings he practiced with his left until it hummed with complaint. In the evenings he took her measure with a wooden sword and lost more often than not. "Better," she told him once, with immense generosity. "You lead with your hip less. Your pride still steps first." "Your words are arrows," he said. She lifted a shoulder, half apology, half welcome. They slept in different rooms under the same roof because love had taught them both that the shapes it takes are not always the ones men like to draw when they sing. King's Landing healed at the speed of habit. The chain across the harbor came down link by link, and men who had nearly died lowering it swore and sweated and were happy. The new winches went up. The pilings went in with hammers that sounded like the heart of a large animal slowed to a useful pace. Davos stood on a new quay at dusk and watched 3 boats come in heavier than they had left in daylight and felt the sort of joy that people who read poems sometimes suspect to be small. It was not small. He found the baker's boy, the one who had lied first and then learned to lie less, and put his hand on his head without asking, and then, awkwardly, took it off. "You look fed," he said. "I am," the boy said. "The Queen's men fixed the paddle wheel, and the mill turns, and my mother got flour for washing the street with the water when the fire came. The soldier with no language, he gave us a loaf. He put it on the step and left. He didn't look back." The boy's mouth pulled to one side as if something were tugging there. "I saved some. For later. It's hard to keep sometimes." "Keeping is most of living," Davos said. "You learn it by watching old people. We do it ugly, but we do it." In the small council chamber, which was still too big for their tastes, they began to settle a shape for things. Davos, announced as master of ships with his ears burning, argued about the price of rope and the schedule of tides, and made the argument interesting somehow. Varys listened and whispered about men from Volantis with spices to sell, and whether it might be possible to ban a certain type of slave trader from calling in port without announcing that one was banning anything. Missandei wrote the law in a hand as clear as water. Grey Worm sat and said little, and then said something like a boulder placed where a river had be, and trying to go wrong. Tyrion learned to like when the sound of the talk changed because Daenerys had decided to speak. He had begun to map the music of that, and it pleased him the way knowing a song will still find its ending pleases anyone who has ever feared silence. They tried men for small crimes, not as pageantry but as practice. A gold cloak who had kept more for himself than the law allowed found himself in the street without his cloak, and had to live with being a man who worked for bread. A Dothraki who refused to understand that women in the city were not trophies learned the word no in 3 languages and discovered that his queen did not enjoy teaching the same lesson twice. A merchant who had hoarded barley under his child's bed cried when the child testified and then cried harder when the law let him keep enough to feed the child and not a scrap more. He returned the barrel he had stolen and then brought 2 more and left them, nervous but upright. A letter from the citadel arrived written in a boredom that only scholars achieve. It asked if the realm had any use for a Grand Maester. "We've an Ambrose now," Sam said, scratching his jaw. "He's fair. He likes chairs. He'll send a man who can make numbers sit still long enough to be counted." Daenerys looked at Tyrion and then at Sam and then, unexpectedly, at Missandei. "The grand in their title belongs to age," she said. "We have that in surplus. Send for a younger one. I want a man who will live long enough to be wrong and then correct himself." "Marwyn,"
Sam ventured.
"No, he's a storm come into a library. He'd leave your books in the rain and smile to see which ones survive. Someone who can hold chalk without tasting it," Daenerys said. "And if he must be old, then let him be old in kindness." The queen signed a writ that declared the faith independent of crown payments in all but charity and made their accounts open to public reading. "They will hate it," Varys said. "They might learn to love it," Missandei countered softly. "Nothing makes a holy man cleaner like being watched." They found more jars in a wine cellar under a moneylender's smelling of prune and surrender. They found none under the orphanage that had once housed 3 quiet girls and loudly dying rats. Tyrion breathed out for a long time there once. He saw the empty stone and thought of a king's madness and the way the air had tasted that night on the Blackwater when fire had become a perfume for a while. He stamped his seal on a map that marked room after room with little black crosses, and if a dot turned up later where a cross had not been, no one scolded. They just carried water. Rhaegal flew a mile further each day. His wings' tear healed like a memory scar. Stretched if pulled too hard, seamed if left. He learned a different way to turn, wider, cautious. He took fish gently from a boat deck one morning, and the man in the boat wept and said the dragon had been careful not to take fingers. "We will be telling our grandchildren that the lords of the air did not bite us unless we tugged," the fisherman said, and then blushed as if the intimacy were rude. Rhaegal belched and left, dropping one scale that a girl found and sold to a boy, who kept it until he forgot why it mattered. On a day with clean wind, Tyrion stood with Daenerys on the balcony where she had watched the siege's dull theater and felt a restlessness that had nothing to do with fear. "I used to dream of shipping myself to Pentos with a bag of coin and becoming useful to no one," he said. "Now I am useful to too many men and women. I am sick with it. And then when I imagine being useless again, I am sicker." "It is the same with fire," she said. "I learned to hold it. Now when I imagine letting it hold me, I think of children's hair." She was not a woman much given to superstition, but she lowered her voice anyway when she said children's hair, as if to keep from calling them to her by accident. "You will be hated," he said. "You are, in fact. There are men in this city who cross themselves in private when they speak your name because it keeps their courage sweet. They will tell stories about you that the children will admire and their parents will distrust. Some of those stories will be true." "Tell them another," she said. "Tell them the dragon pulled up water from the river to quench a fire. Tell them the queen burned her own pride to feed them grain." She looked down at him and smiled in a way that made him feel taller. Tell them you learned to count to a number higher than your fear. I can count very high, he said, and she laughed. Not much, but enough for the night air to keep it and carry it down. An envoy came from Old Town at last with promises pinned neatly in his words. Timber by the river Honeywine, nails by the crate from Bitterbridge, hacks to rebuild sluice gates, and also with a request for a charter to rebuild the September in King's Landing on a smaller scale with more books and fewer knives. It would do your story good, he said cautiously, watching Daenerys's eyes. To be seen worshipping as your people do. The gods have all the worship they can use, she said. Let the people have a place to stand out of the rain. Build it. Make it less golden than the last. Leave the doors open. She leaned back and flicked her gaze to Tyrion. And if they ever begin weighing men's souls to see what money they're worth, pull the roof down by night. Tyrion promised and meant it. They put on a feast because men need them. The square before the Red Keep filled with tables and lamps hung on ropes. Lord Gendry oversaw the forging of spits because it made his hands calm. Davos counted barrels with a miser's grin. Varys arranged for 500 small cakes flavored with lemon and cinnamon to appear as if conjured and made sure that none of the cakes reached the high table until the low ones had had their fill. Missandei translated jokes from Dothraki to the cities. Tongue and then back again, and discovered that mirth travels surprisingly well between fields. Grey Worm stood and did not smile and ate quietly and went to stand guard again after exactly 1 cup of wine. Because his comfort was the city's sleeping, not the city's laughter. Tyrion saw the baker's wife there. Lael had put on her one good ribbon. He put a cup in front of her, and uncharacteristically did not sit and ask 100 questions. He watched instead as she rested her hand on her boy's head and as the boy leant into it, and he felt full like a horn that's done being blown and lies on a table waiting for someone else to need it. At the end of the night Daenerys rose without banging a cup because she had learned that power does not need to shout at men who have already filled their bellies. We will be as good as we can, she said. We will be cruel as little as we must. When I fail you, you will tell me. When you fail me, I will tell you. When we fail children, we will not call it cleverness. She raised her cup. To the old stones that held, and to the new ones that will be better. To the new ones, the city said back. It sounded like a wish meant sincerely. After, when the tables were broken back into planks and the dogs ran licking and the last lanterns swayed, Tyrion walked the quiet street where Sandor Clegane had once leaned a shoulder against a wall and made the stones look small. He left a cup for him, the kind without a handle, because Sandor scorned things with handles. He poured a measure of beer into the dust and said nothing. The wind found him and pressed into his coat as if trying to describe a shape without using hands. He took the long way around back to the keep and stopped where a tiny altar had been built of stones and 3 ribbons. Someone had tied a braid of white hair there, and someone else had left a coin, and neither had been stolen yet. He added his hand for a moment to the topmost stone and pressed it until his palm hurt. In the morning he met Gilly and the baby in a corridor. The baby had grown teeth and found them interesting. He chewed on Tyrion's finger with focus. Tyrion yelped and laughed and let the baby do it again. You're rebuilding a world for him? Gilly said, half awe, half accusation. For him, Tyrion agreed. And for the people who will try and keep him from using it poorly. He removed his finger carefully. Watch him around ink. He seems the type. She smiled. Not the shy, small smile she had used to carry like a winter cloak, but something bigger, wearing less fear. I will, she said. I like how it smells, but I like his hands better. They sent 3 ships out with grain for Skagos because Varys's birds had brought word of a lean spring there. They sent 2 envoys west to Pike with Yara, one to count and one to charm, because those rocks had their own rules and could not be bought with whatever the mainland called kindness. They sent letters to men Tyrion did not much care for precisely because he did not care for them. Men who would keep their word when the prophet was right and who needed to know that prophet lay in peace now. They took the scorpions down bolt by bolt. A boy kept one of the bolts under his bed until his mother found it and made him carry it to the smith and watch it be hammered into a spade. By the time leaves began to burn themselves into red along the city's few trees, Regal had resumed a full circle in the sky. He and Drogon played sometimes like pups, which was terrifying to watch even if one knew rationally that they loved the hand that fed them. Daenerys went up in the mornings before most were awake and sat with Drogon's warm flank a while. Just a woman sitting with her animal. A queen who was not always performing queen. Tyrion watched once from a distance and thought that if someone had asked him to draw what power looked like, he would have drawn that. A woman and a beast, quiet, no one there to praise them. The girl with the one shoe grew into two shoes. The gold cloak who had knocked a man down for onions and had later cried in a latrine quit the watch and apprenticed to a cooper. The first barrel he made leaked and the second only leaked a little and the third did not leak at all. He put his hand on the wood and felt pride and then shame and then pride again. A man who had shouted that the queen would burn them all once upon a time changed his cry to burn the next loaf when his wife underbaked, and they both laughed until they had the breath to stop. Jon Snow came before Snow did. He rode alone except for Ghost and a boy with a pack who watched the city with a frozen excitement like men have in temples. He dismounted in the yard and stood a moment, caught between seeing and being seen, and then did what he always did when the world felt too near. He found the nearest duty. He went to the dragons first. He stood with them, not close, not far, at a good distance that learned itself. Drogon snuffed the air and did not object. Regal lowered his big head and made a sound that might have been pleasure or wind. Jon put out his hand the way men do to skittish horses, and then did not go any further because he remembered the weight of their bodies when they had run near him in the air, and did not want to pretend they were smaller than they were. Daenerys came down the steps and they stood looking at each other like two people who had both misread a map together on a long trip. They spoke little in the first hour because words had bruised themselves against the last parting. Later, they sat at a small table with olives and bread and a cheese that had gone sharp and faced it. "You have done it," Jon said. "They are eating." "Not enough," she said. "But more than none." She rubbed at the edge of the table with her thumb. "I am learning to say less and do it. It is like riding a horse that hates you and then decides it can tolerate you if you stop pretending you are something you are not. You are a Q. Yoon," he said. "I am a woman who makes men put their backs into work," she said, gaze steady. "The crown is a story that makes them believe the work means something." He nodded. "I like stories," he said. "I like work." He did not move to the north permanently after. He did not stay either. He became what some men are, a bridge the world knows how to walk across. He went north when the snows demanded a strong back and south when the heat needed men who knew the cold. He became a piece of the map that belonged to no one and everyone. When people tried to make songs, he ducked them and did more chores. Time made routines out of ideas and then made those routines invisible, which is history's smoothest trick. The ships came and left. The granaries filled and emptied. Men were punished who deserved it and some who did not, and then were unpunished by quiet hands. The city forgot the taste of fear and remembered it when a lamp went out too quickly and then laughed at itself for remembering it. A woman raised a child who had been born hungry and taught him that bread is not a miracle, only work, but that work is sometimes a miracle. Women stood in the September with the doors open and did not fear the doors closing. Once, a man tried to confess in public because he thought that was the way to get attention, and found himself held by a priest who told him that apologies were better when whispered into the ear of the person wounded. He went away oddly contented. Tyrion kept his old vices because one does not rebuild entirely, and he took to walking at dawn with a cup of cold small beer and a slice of bread and calling it temperance. He cared very much and then cared in a different way on days when caring felt like an illness. He scratched letters to a girl in Bravos who had once taught him the proper way to curse in High Valyrian and told her truths. He could not easily tell a queen because a queen requires shape in language that a friend does not. Once, he and Daenerys stood on the seawall and watched a storm change its mind before it reached them. He said, "In another life you would have burned this city. In another life you would have argued me out of it too late," she said. She leaned on the stone and let the spray wash her face. "I like this one." The children's clapping game altered season by season. In the spring they clapped, "Hush, hush, 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 hush," as if the danger were in the silence and the saving were in the quiet. In summer they clapped, "Crack, boom, hush, hush, crack," because the dragons had turned fire into a tool. In winter, when the wind made hoes unkind and the stones under feet unforgiving, they clapped, "Bread, bread, bread, hush, hush," because hunger had a rhythm that men learned and then hid. One night, long after doors had learned not to slam and bells had learned not to ring the wrong things, Tyrion found himself again on the Dragonstone cliff during a brief journey there to supervise an accounting that needed a man with less imagination and more sums. The sea moved its old breath. He remembered that first plan, and the way the fog had obeyed them as if the world had taken pity. He remembered Yara's blade, Euron's grin skimming off his face like oil, Davos's soft command and hard work. He remembered the moment when fire had become disciplined as any soldier, and the exact hour when he had asked a woman with fire in her to become patient as if patience were a crown. He laughed softly to the wind, and the wind did not mind. Behind him, a boy and a girl had come to lay a small bunch of herbs on a rock because their mother believed in herbs, and he watched them do it, and then pretended not to have seen. He had learned the decency of being a stranger when devotion was being done. When he returned to the city, Missandei showed him a new proclamation. It made him smile. The Queen requests all accusations of rape be heard within 3 days, and that if men lie about such things, they will be punished, and if women are scorned for telling the truth, the scorners will carry stones for a week. It was precise and soft, and he loved it and knew the work it would ask of them and approved that it asked it. "Would you like to add a flourish?" she asked mildly. "My flourishes have felled too many trees," he said. "Keep it as it is." He pulled a second paper from a stack and frowned. "And this? This seems to propose a tax on wine too low to be respectable." Missandei's eyes went bright. "A joke," she said. "Varys wanted to know if you read everything. He owes me, what did you call it? A drink if you do." "I read everything," he said in a poor imitation of severity. "Especially the laws that would deprive me of my morals." Varys came in carrying, of course, 2 cups. "Only the finest," he cooed. "The finest is in Volantis," Tyrion said. "But I accept the second finest." He lifted the cup. "To a realm that has learned to call mercy strong." "It will forget," Varys said, because it was his calling to say such things so that they would feel more precious when they did not happen. "We'll teach it again," Tyrion said. A ship returned from the west with a tail nothing like the shape of the world men had drawn on the better maps. It had found nothing and something both, a long emptiness and then an island of birds who were too bold and sweet fruit that tasted of old sugar. The captain spoke of a girl who had seen the sun drop into the sea and had laughed and had not been afraid of anything. He brought out a knife whose balance made Tyrion think of a certain small hand and a certain small decision that had let a world find warmth again. He bought the knife and put it away, because some souvenirs should be kept hidden until they matter. Dorne sent olives and jokes. The Iron Islands sent cured fish and thunder. The North sent cloth that smelled like snow even when it had been washed 3 times. The Reach sent wine and rivalries. Storm's End sent a letter written in a clumsy but improv. Angie hand that spoke of roofs repaired and men paid on time, and a smith taking joy in making hinges that did not squeal. The Vale sent silence, which is their way of bragging when things are good. An old man told his granddaughter the story of the starving city saved from its own queen and from its history both. She rolled her eyes and asked if dragons had licked crumbs from the streets. He said yes, deadpan, and she threw her head back and laughed in a way that made him laugh too, and he did not correct himself because truth, to keep its shape, sometimes needs a little lie perched on it like a bird. In time the realm forgot some of the things it ought to have, and remembered some it did not expect to, and filled the spaces between with habit. The harbor came to smell less like tar and more like fish again. The mill's wheels turned and men argued about the price of bread, just enough and not so much. The queen grew a little older, which meant her hair did nothing and her face did nearly nothing, and her patience grew more muscular than even her anger, which had always been fine. The hand lost some hair and gained a belly because it turns out being virtuous is tiring and one must sit sometimes. When Daenerys died, it was not then and not yet. When Tyrion died, it was not then and not yet. The sea died last and then breathed again because it liked to scare men. The children kept clapping games because they liked to keep their hands busy while their mouths told the story. And the story, told and retold, made a city that might have burned decide to feed itself instead, and made a woman with dragons decide to ask men to build a wall of bread. It is not an ending that will please poets who like tragedies and kings who like praise that sounds like fire. Pleased, most days, the people who had to live in it. On a certain morning, years later, Tyrion met the baker's wife again by accident because the city had few true accidents. It just had too many lines crossing to keep track. Her boy was taller than he ought to have been and walked with a better stick than he had once. "The wheel turns," she said simply, which was both a proverb and a report. He bought a loaf and took it to the steps where Daenerys was hearing petitions in the sun because she had discovered light made lies more visible. He sat below her, where men who had the ear of queens sometimes choose to sit to remember their size. He ate bread and listened. He found himself admitting that he loved, without cynicism, the way the world sounded when it was mending. Sometimes, when the wind came in from the east and the city's birds went wild for a minute, the people put their hands on their children's heads and said, "Hush, the dragons are turning." They said it as if dragons were weather. Perhaps they had become that at last. Necessary, interesting, terrible if you forgot them, comforting if you learned their moods. It is a grace to live in such weather if you know what to plant and when. In the quiet at the center of all that noise, a man who had once wanted to be small and safe and uncounted leaned back and let joy come without checking whether it had an invoice. He had been wrong often. He had been right sometimes. He had guessed, with as much kindness as he could muster, and been paid in days like this, where bread was plain and sweet and men did not bow too low when the queen passed because their spines were not so used to bending. He lifted his cup to the sea he could not see from that bench and said the old toast. "To the sea," he murmured and smiled, "and to hunger when it teaches, and to fire when it remembers who it burns for."